Hi, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today titled Mid-Senior Career Researcher Program Opportunities. My name is Sarah Phones. I'm the Grant Program Specialist with the AASM Foundation, and I will be leading today's webinar. Before we get started, I do want to remind everybody that your audio is muted and your camera is off. The chat is currently disabled for attendees, but if you have any questions, please add those to the Q&A and we will get to them at the end. Closed captioning and a live transcript is also available should you want to have that on. And this webinar will be recorded, so a recording will be sent out within 1 to 2 weeks from today. So to kick things off, we have our learning objectives today. At the end of this webinar, attendees should be able to understand the different purposes of each research grant opportunity for mid-career and senior researchers, gain insight on grant application and review processes, and learn about the post-award process and expectations for active grant recipients. All right, before I get into too many specifics about our specific programs for today, I do want to just give a quick overview of the ASM Foundation as a whole. So our purpose, as you can see here, is investing in people, research, and communities to improve the sleep health of all people. And in carrying out that purpose, we adhere to several values. We are evidence generating, innovative, collaborative, inclusive, and strategic in everything that we do. We have four main goals as part of our overall purpose and our overall strategic plan. Those goals are to support career development of students, clinicians, and researchers, advance science to improve sleep care, increase dissemination of sleep science, and grow our reach to include more AASM members, individuals, and external organizations. So for all of the grant programs that I'll be going over today, those primarily tie back to goal number 2, which is advancing science to improve sleep care. We do touch a little bit upon career development aspect, and I will kind of get into more of that later, but these all link back mostly to our second goal. All right, so overall, the ASM Foundation has 3 different categories of programs: research grant, career development grants, or research grants, training programs, and community programs. And so today we will be focusing on our research grant programs, and mainly those will be our investigator-initiated grants. For all of our programs, for the application process, we do have some things that we ask everyone to keep in mind, regardless of what program you're applying to. And the main one is to always contact us as soon as possible. A lot of times with more in-depth questions like eligibility, sometimes those questions cannot always be addressed immediately by staff, and they have to be reviewed by foundation leadership, and that may take at least a week. It could take a little longer. So we encourage you, if there's any questions, it may be a quick answer, but it may not be. So it's always best to reach out to us early. And any inquiries that come in less than 2 business days prior to a deadline run the risk of not being responded by that deadline. So always reach out to us as soon as you have a question. It's what we're here for. We want to make sure that you're getting your questions in plenty of time to get them addressed. The other thing is to adhere to all of our program-specific guidelines and all of our policies across the board. On each request for applications or nominations or proposals, depending on the program, there will be various page limits. There may be a specific template that's required. All of that will be addressed in either the RFA or on the application form itself. So please make sure that you're adhering to all of those because we are not able to accept applications that are incomplete or don't follow the stated guidelines. The other thing that is very important to us that we have a new policy surrounding is the use of AI tools. This full text is available on our frequently asked questions page on our website, but Essentially, all applicants will be asked to attest in their application, right on the form, that their submitted work reflects their own original work and that everything submitted is factual. But again, this whole text is on our website, so you'll have that available as a reference. It's also in each RFA. So, just kind of as an overview of each of our programs, primarily we have these are research funding programs with a range of funding from $50,000 all the way up to $250,000. The one program that I will call out specifically because it differs a little from the rest is our Research Mentor Award. This is the only merit-based award that falls into the mid-career and senior researcher programs. So that one is a bit different because it's not directly funding research. And I will get into the specifics of this one a little later, but the others are all aimed at supporting investigator-initiated grants that are designed to advance sleep health. So our first program today will be the Bridge Success Grant for mid-career and senior investigators. So very broadly, this program is designed for mid-career and senior investigators who are applying to an investigator-initiated federal grant application. Their original grant hasn't been funded, and so this grant provides time and funding for you to rework the original grant and resubmit and have a successful application at that time. Currently we don't have any specific topics that are required for this program, as long as they are addressing sleep and circadian science or sleep health. But this one is really designed for applicants who are at a point in their career where funding to continue the research program is necessary to help them stay in the sleep field. This program is available twice a year, so we have 2 cycles. The next one that will be open is coming up in November, and then cycle 2 of 2027 will start in May. These all take about 5 to 6 months from the application point to the point of funding notifications. And then once funding notifications are sent, I have the latest date for to start the project here. We offer 9 months for applicants or grant recipients to start their project after receiving funding, and I will get into that process later. But these are just here as a reference for you so you know what that timeline might look like in the event that you receive funding. So if you have a application in mind that you've previously submitted that unfortunately did not receive funding, we have a few grant mechanisms that automatically are eligible for this program. That includes the National Institutes of Health R01, Veteran Affairs Merit Review Award, and then Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, or PCORI, Research Grant and Dissemination and Implementation Grant. But we totally recognize that this does not cover all the investigator-initiated grant options that are out there. So if you have one and it's not listed here, that doesn't mean that it's automatically ineligible. We ask that you reach out to us and confirm that it's appropriate for this particular grant program before you apply. The last thing that we want is for you to put something together and then it is not eligible. So always reach out to us and check. And we'll ask that you provide justification and a description to how that particular grant mechanism is equivalent to the ones that are listed there. The other thing that I want to mention is that if you are submitting to a different mechanism, even if it's within the same agency, so if you're going from one NIH mechanism to the other, that is considered a new application and not a resubmission. So that would not be eligible on your first time around. The funding here is really straightforward. This offers up to $100,000 for up to 1 year. We don't have any restrictions on the distribution of expenses, but our indirect costs are capped at 8%. All right. The eligibility is also pretty straightforward. Individuals who have a doctoral degree, there are several listed here, are eligible, and individuals do need to have applied for an investigator-initiated grant from a federal funding agency that they plan to resubmit. The other thing that I want to note is the volume of federally funded grants you currently hold and still be eligible. So if you do have one current, for example, an R01, you would still be eligible. And as part of your project proposal, you'll provide justification for why you need the additional funds to continue your program of research. If you have two or more federally funded, you would not be eligible. We have all of our application components listed here, but the main thing to note is we will ask for your unfunded application as part of the application for the Bridge to Success grant. We provide all of this to our reviewers so they can assess all of the critiques that you received from the original study section and how well you're addressing those. If you have a summary statement, if that's available, we ask for you to provide that as well. And then we'll have the full original unfunded application as part of your application. After that, we have a research plan and goals, information about all your project personnel, letters of support, budget details, and then regardless of if your project is exempt or not exempt, we ask for a plan on protection of human subjects or animal subjects. All right, so we use our scoring rubric follows the same anchor points as the NIH, so this is likely very, very familiar to you, but we have a range of 1 through 9, with a 1 being a really strong, high impact, very competitive application, all the way down to a 9, which would be a lower impact, non-competitive application. All of our Bridge Success grants are reviewed across these criteria. We ask that the reviewers review for significance, the approach, evaluating the investigators and how well suited they are for the project, as well as the environment, which includes institutional support, as well as availability of equipment or any other physical resources. One really important thing that we ask of all our reviewers is that they consider only the materials that are specifically provided in the application, without making assumptions or drawing on something that isn't provided in the application. So everything that you want to make sure that they are taking into account, make sure that it is in your proposal. All right, so once applications have gone through our review process, the final funding decisions for this grant does fall into our career development grants review committee because it is bridge funding to keep your career on its trajectory. We get final scores and critiques from all of our reviewers, and then all of that information goes to our executive committee, who will provide funding recommendations to our board of directors. We do have a mechanism in place that we call a rapid revise and resubmit. This allows applicants who have weaknesses that are identified in their application that may be quicker or easier to address. They will be given the opportunity to make changes and turn in those updated components of their application to address all that reviewer feedback, and that will go for additional consideration to our board of directors for a final decision. Typically, that's like a 4-week process. After that, notifications go out to all applicants, regardless of the outcome. We will let you know what the outcome is, and you'll also receive the critique forms and a summary statement if your application was discussed. Once you do receive funding, we have a few pre-contracting requirements before we can fully execute your grant contract. Most of these are administrative, pertaining to payment details and working with your grant administrator at your institution, but we require that either IRB or IACUC approval or exemption is in place before we can fully execute the contract and issue any funds and get your project started. So it's really important to get that process going as soon as possible, and just keep us posted on if there's any delays or anything that comes up, so we can always work with you. Once your grant contract is executed, Progress reports are due every 6 months because these are 1 year grants. And then your final report will be due 90 days to allow everything to be finalized, and the outcomes, all your expenses. You'll have 90 days to get all that together once your project ends. We do have some expectations of what our grantees accomplish throughout their project period. We expect everyone to resubmit the original investigator-initiated federal grant that was previously unfunded. Obviously, carry out the project as it was described in your application, and then submitting the findings and outcomes of this project to peer-reviewed journals. The Journal of Clinical Sleep Medicine is, of course, always a great option, and then submitting an abstract to the annual sleep meeting as well. You can include the plan and the expenses for these in your application. So you can include those publication costs and things like that in this grant. We also ask that project progress reports and final reports are submitted by the due date specified. Once that contract is executed, you'll receive your exact due dates. So we ask that those are on time because when they become more delinquent, there can be some adverse action on the grant, which we always want to avoid. So make sure that those are, you're working with your grant administrators to get those in by the due date. All right, and so these are our most recent recipients for 2025 and the first cycle of 2026. As you can see here, there's a bit of a variety of the grants that they intend to resubmit to. So you can kind of get a sense of what grants have been most popular, I guess, for this program. And then we will switch gears a little bit. We'll move on to our Research Mentor Award. So as I mentioned, this is our only merit-based award that falls under the mid-career and senior investigators category. And this award was really established to recognize individuals that are really dedicated and making a really significant impact on the early career researchers that they're mentoring, and really fostering like a foundation of success for the next generation of sleep and circadian investigators. For eligible mentors for this program, they will need to have been actively mentoring for at least the past 10 years. And rather than a straightforward application process, these recipients are nominated for consideration through a nomination process from current or past mentees. I kind of touched on the eligibility, but we ask that in addition to their past 10 years of mentoring experience, they hold a minimum rank of either associate professor or something equivalent, or they have shown responsibility for multiple successfully funded projects, and showing sustainability of a track record of funding. Each recipient will receive $500 as their award, and then they also will be recognized at a special event at the upcoming sleep meeting. So for this program, nominations will open in September and be due in November. Final decisions on who the recipients will be provided to everybody by the end of January, and then our next sleep meeting in 2027 will be from June 6th to 9th. So that is when they'll be recognized. All right, so for the nomination, we do ask for just some basic details on who the nominee is. As part of the CV that we request, we do ask, if it's not already there, a table listing who their current and past mentees are, and for those past mentees, what positions they currently hold, if that information is available. There's no maximum on the number of nomination letters that can be provided for each nominee, but we do ask for a minimum of 2, and they should describe the kind of guidance and support that they have provided to their mentees over their mentorship career, to support the development of those mentees. We have all of our review criteria here for how the nominations will be assessed. So in developing the nomination letters, make sure to touch on all of these items: intellectual growth of the mentees and the broader community, talent development, collegiality, and community building through their generosity, advocacy, sponsorship, networking, dissemination, balancing productivity with career advancement, and then positive role models. So I recognize that there's a whole, it's a broad spectrum, but make sure as much as you can to touch on all of these items in their nomination letters. And so this year, 2026 is the first year that we have offered this grant, or offered this award. So we recognize three really outstanding mentors, Doctors Indu Ayapa, Christina McRae, and Wilfred Pigeon. All right, and shifting gears again. So our next one will be the Restless Leg Syndrome Foundation Research Grant. So this is actually a grant that we have been collaborating with the RLS Foundation since 2024 to co-fund basic and clinical research on restless leg syndrome. Each year, the Restless Leg Syndrome Foundation will publish their list of their research priorities for that round of funding. And then this grant is actually a two-step process, so it consists of a letter of intent, and then if you are invited, a full application. This is one of the grants that the AASM Foundation does not administer, so the application and review process goes through the RLS Foundation, but I can give an overview of what that process looks like. All right, so the RLS Foundation has some requirements as far as the eligibility. The principal investigator needs to be at an institution within the United States, Canada, or other countries where the institution supervision of the grant administration is possible. There's human subject protection, approval is required. They're following the same guidelines provided by the U.S. Public Health Service as far as animal welfare. And then for multiple awards, each recipient can have one from the RLS Foundation within a given year. Like I mentioned, it's a two-step process. So the pre-application or letter of intent components are all provided here. Everyone will be asked to provide a rationale, identify the focus area from that list of priorities, provide the specific aims and the study design, describe their research team, and then also describe the impact and relevant to restless leg syndrome and the population of patients. All right, so as far as their award process, the RLS Foundation's Scientific and Medical Advisory Board, as well as external reviewers, will review all the letters of intent and the applications. Once it gets to that review process, they are evaluated on the overall impact, significance, approach, innovation, and individual criteria are all considered. And then their board of directors will make those funding decisions on the grant recipients. And so we have been very proud to work with the RLS Foundation. We've provided funding to these three projects over the past few years. And then again, this will kick off again in 2027. All right, and then finally today, our last program will be the Strategic Research Grant. So the Strategic Research Grant is our largest grant program. This is fully investigator-initiated grants, and these are aimed at addressing gaps in knowledge that, when addressed, can impact and provide better patient care and diagnosis and treatment for all people with sleep disorders. We do have eligible topics that change a bit each year, and these are aligning with research priority needs that the AASM Foundation has identified. And this program is also a two-step process with a letter of intent and then a full application. For 2027, we have finalized what our research focus areas will be. So these may be familiar because these were included in last year's, But the first one is the AASM Clinical Practice Guidelines, Research Gaps, and Dissemination and Implementation. So projects that will adhere to this research focus area will either directly address research gaps that are identified um, by the AASM's clinical practice guidelines, or um, focus on dissemination and implementation of these practice recommendations to ensure they are being effectively implemented and adopted across various patient populations. The second one is ASM strategic plan goals. So eligible projects will fall under the categories of sleep medicine awareness, practice success, and technology implementation. Um, One thing to note is that we are excited once again to continue partnering with both Wake Up Narcolepsy and the Hypersomnia Foundation to potentially co-fund grants that are under these categories that are focused on either idiopathic hypersomnia and or narcolepsy. The one thing to note is that we are giving priority to programs or proposals that increase sleep healthcare equity. So those are things like access to services, affordability, inclusion of understudied populations, patient-centered outcomes, or longer-term outcomes. So that's one thing to keep in mind as you're putting everything together. All right, so because this is a two-step process, letters of intent will open in September and be due in October. Full application invitations will be sent out no later than January 29th, and then you'll have about 6 weeks to put those together, and they will be due on March 8th. Following that, funding notifications will go out to everybody who submits an application by June 21st. And then you'll have, again, 9 months, and so the latest date will be March 21st. We have 3 funding categories for this program. Category 1 is the largest one with up to $250,000 in funding with a duration of up to 3 years. Category 2 is up to 2 years with a duration, up to 2 years with a funding amount of $100,000. And then category 3 is up to $50,000 with a duration of 1 year. The eligibility for this program is very inclusive. So eligibility applies to sleep scientists that have a master's level degree or higher. We do welcome international applicants as long as they can accept grant funding in US dollars. The letter of intent is also very streamlined as well. We'll ask for a few details about your project. You will be asked to identify which funding category you are submitting your letter of intent to, as well as the project period in months. So you may indicate category 1 and 36 months. So you'll have to have that information decided when you submit the letter of intent. And then we'll also ask for some basic contact details for your principal investigator, which we use just for administrative purposes at this stage. The letter of intent will have 6 different sections that are all listed here. We will provide a specific template, and we require that the template is used for all letters of intent. It will address each of these 6 categories, but we will ask that it is followed so that everything can be assessed equally. You can include figures or tables, but they will count in that 3-page limit. And one of the most important things about your letter of intent is that it cannot include any identifying information about you as the principal investigator, your institution, any of the team members that you plan to bring on, because all of our letters of intent undergo a blinded review process. This allows our reviewers to focus on these criteria that you see here without considering the institution. So we have all of our reviewers who review the letters of intent consider the responsiveness, significance, healthcare equity again, and then alignment with the ASM Foundation's strategic goal of advancing science to improve sleep care. So please make sure there's nothing in the header, nothing in the footer. Make sure that your name an institution are not included. Um, After the letter of intent, if you're invited to submit a full application, we will ask for the full application. This is very, very similar to what was already presented for the Bridge Success Grant, the same basic components. Some of these items will automatically carry over from your letter of intent to your full application. So your project title, your research focus area, your funding category, project period, those things will all automatically apply for your full application. If, as you're putting everything together, you realize that something needs to change as far as, maybe your project period needs to be shorter, maybe it needs to be longer. If you do need to make those changes, that's a request that has to come through and be reviewed and approved by our leadership. You'll be provided a deadline on when you need to submit those and how to submit those if you're invited to a full application. But those changes, you're bound by the details that you provided in your original letter of intent. So if there's anything that does need to change, just reach out to us and we'll start that process. All right. So for the past couple of years, for the Strategic Research Grant, we have adopted the simplified framework that has been implemented by the National Institutes of Health. This allows the focus to be on the potential of the research to be impactful and make a meaningful difference for the sleep medicine field. So the two criteria that are scored are the importance of the research and the rigor and feasibility. The expertise and resources are just evaluated for sufficiency. So rather than receiving an individual numeric score, they receive sufficient or not sufficient. And we do use the same scoring scale, once again, that the NIH is using. So a range of 1 as the strongest and 9 to the weakest. The funding decision process is also very similar to the one that was described for the Bridge to Success Grant. These are all reviewed by our investigator-initiated grants review committee, and then they go to our executive committee, who will make recommendations to our board of directors. And then once again, we always provide notifications to all applicants regardless of the outcome, as well as summary statements and your review or critique forms. Again, the post-award activities are also very similar to the Bridge to Success Grant. The one thing that I will note here is because these are longer project periods, they can run up to 3 years. If your project period is 2 years or longer, progress reports are only due annually. So they won't be due every 6 months unless you only have a 1-year project period. All right, the main deliverables here that we have expectations for all of the applicants or all the grant recipients, again, are to carry out the aims as described. If you do have any modifications to the scope of your project, to the project personnel, to your budget, those do require AASM Foundation approval. And then we also expect that the findings will be published in peer-reviewed journals and submitted as an abstract, and that all the progress and final reports are submitted by the due dates that are specified. All right, and so for the 2025 grant recipients, we were able to provide up to these 7 recipients with a total of almost $1.5 billion. So this is our largest program, but these are the projects that were funded in 2025, and 2026 information will be coming out soon. So stay tuned for that, but these are our current recipients for 2025. I do also just want to touch upon a couple of resources that may be relevant for potential applicants for the Strategic Research Grant. We have a couple of Sleep Grand Rounds webinars that are hosted by the AASM Foundation. So coming up in August, we'll have research gaps and opportunities in AASM clinical practice guidelines with several panelists. And then in September, we'll be focusing on women's sleep health research gaps specifically. So registration for these events will be coming out very soon, so stay tuned for that as well. All right, and that is everything that I have today. I do have time for questions, so we'll get there. But if you have any questions, need to contact anyone, um, we have our email and the direct phone line to reach me is right here. You can also scan the QR code and schedule a meeting. Um, Again, it'll be with me. If you want to discuss in more depth or have questions about eligibility or anything like that, we are always more than happy to talk to everyone and make sure um, that you're on the right course, that you're eligible, that your program or your project is appropriate. So please always reach out. This is what we're here for. We're always happy to help. But let me see if we have any Q&A questions. All right. Okay, so it looks like we have our first question is, what if I receive a British Success Grant, but then my NIH R01 is funded? Which is a great question. So the ASM Foundation does have a policy on the budgetary and scientific overlap that can exist between your funded grants and the grant proposal. So if you receive your Bridge to Success funding and then you find out that your R01 application receives funding, you may be able to retain both. Um, there's a request process where you would have to demonstrate that there is not scientific or budgetary um, overlap between the two projects. That's a process that would go through our leadership for approval, but it's definitely an option. If there's overlap between the two and there's not any appropriate changes that can be made to the Bridge to Success grant, that can result in relinquishing the grant. But in the event that something like this comes up, we encourage you to please reach out to us, and we can kind of address all these on a case by case basis, because that does happen occasionally, which is great. We want people to get R01 funding. So just always stay in touch and we can kind of go through each step together. But that's a good question. All right. Oh, okay. And then we also have a follow-up. So the person says, if my R01 was scored but not dismissed, can I still apply for the Bridge to Success? And yes, you can. As long as you have critiques that can be provided and reviewed by our reviewers, it does not necessarily have to be discussed. If it was discussed, we will ask for the summary statement, but it's not an absolute requirement. So, great. All right, I think that is all our questions currently. And I know sometimes that there might be more specific questions that you want to discuss in more depth, which totally makes sense. So if there are any questions like that, please always, like I said, reach out to us and we can kind of discuss your situation in more detail. All right, so we have one more question that says, how do I know what research focus area to submit the strategic research grant LOI to? And can you provide feedback on alignment with the AASM? All right, so the first part of that, to know which research focus area, we have on the RFA or the RFP, request for proposals, for the strategic research grant, you will see examples of topics that fall into each research focus area. So those are examples. They aren't entirely exhaustive. But when you submit your letter of intent, that is your opportunity really to make the case on what research focus area your project best aligns to. So we do have those examples, but they aren't exhaustive. You just have to meet one of those focus areas. So it's sort of your case, your moment to make your case on why it is an eligible project. And then for alignment with the ASM, this could kind of go two ways. If it's the ASM strategic plan goals and you want to make sure it aligns with one of those strategic plan goals as far as sleep medicine awareness, practice success and technology implementation. The strategic plan is available on the ASM's website. As far as alignment with the ASM Foundation's goal of advancing science to improve sleep care, you can also see more detail on that on our website under our strategic plan. So those are resources we can put on that are available online that you can access. All right. Okay, so our next question is when can we start submitting LOIs for the strategic research grant? So that will open up September 14th, 2026, and then they'll be due October 19th. All right. All right, and then our next question says, can my colleagues and I submit multiple nominations for our mentor for the Research Mentor Award? And the answer is you can submit multiple nomination letters. We ask that they are all included in one nomination submission. So you can select a contact person to actually submit the nomination. That way we only have one per nominee, but you can include as many nomination letters from your current colleagues, past mentees, everybody, all in that same nomination. There isn't a limit on the number of letters, so they can all be included. All right. All righty. All right, so it looks like that is all our questions currently. We are just a couple of minutes away from our end time. So, like I said, if there's something more specific that you want to discuss in more depth, please always reach out to us. But we look forward to hopefully receiving applications. And if there's anything we can help with, of course, that's what we're here for. But other than that, thank you so much for being here today and have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much.